Good morning, everybody.
Hey,
It's June 11th, 2020.
it's the
We're
year
one
of our
ep-
Lord.
we're one episode away from our half-century anniversary. Really.
Yes. Yeah, so like if any of you out there are good at throwing parties and stuff and want to figure out how to throw us a party tomorrow, like we would be happy about that. I have
Mhm.
no idea what that would look like, but
I'm open. I'm open to whatever.
yeah, yeah.
I'll, I'll
So
just I'll just get a keg and just drink the entire keg within 30 minutes, and that'll be the whole show. I think that would kill me, but I'm willing to sacrifice for art.
for the greater cause.
Yeah.
All
So
right, so this is a monumental episode.
yeah, I originally just called it Monumental, and I realized I missed an opportunity to name it the Monumental episode, so I'm going to do that now. So this is the official name of the episode.
Yeah.
But for those who don't know us, I don't know why someone would just be meeting us for the first time now, but I'm Mark Van Steenwyk. I'm the director for the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
And I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct MICA, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing.
And we're talking about monuments today. That's why it's monumental.
Yes, big pieces of bronze are falling over.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been enjoying the different ways that Columbus has been treated. Like he's been beheaded, he's been just generally toppled, and he's been drowned.
Right, yeah, he's at the bottom of a pond or river.
Yeah, my favorite headline from all this is Christopher Columbus discovers bottom of a lake.
Yes, that was a good one.
That's a good one.
Good one. So.
And there's other monuments too, like the Confederate monuments, even the Confederate flag. All these sort of symbols of our atrocious past have been, which have been called into question for a long time now. We're reaching a tipping point on that. So good times.
Tipping point. Tipping point. Ha ha ha. Yeah, and then so as the monuments fall, the liberal heads explode. Right, not just the conservative heads. A lot of white liberal heads are exploding
because this is not done properly and in order.
Yes, as the Presbyterians would say, decently and in order.
Yeah, I was trying to get that. Thanks for picking it up.
Yeah, you're inner Presbyterian.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's very interesting, and I'd actually like to couch this within a much longer historical time frame.
Yes.
Right? Because part of what is happening as these things fall over, I mean, part of the argumentation that goes on and the great distress, that the hue and cry distress is, oh my gosh, we're going to forget our history. These things have to be here forever. They're part of America. They're part, and you see the same thing in churches. I mean, I was part of this huge controversy at a church here in Minneapolis about taking down some tapestries, very similar kinds of things. And, part of what I see the problem of all this being is that America is just too damn young. Right. And so if you were to go to India, let's say, and say, show me the statues from the beginning of India that you have preserved. I mean, people wouldn't even understand the question. Like, people would look at you like you were speaking in Martian or something, right? Because first of all, India has existed in numerous iterations of what that even means as India for thousands of years. And their history is so old that they're literally, all the statues from 3000, 4000 BC, have literally dissolved except for one or two that have been dug up and discovered. And so people in most of the world where there's this hugely long historical expanse do not have any expectations that certain public art forms are going to remain exactly the same forever.
Mm-hmm.
But our history is so short, and most of us don't even know our history, but it's so short that we have this idea of infinite permanence of these things.
Yeah, I mean, part of this fits into the American psyche, that somehow this is one of the qualities of being an empire, is that empires think that they exist at the end of history. And there's a certain kind of puts us in a double bind. We think we're the end, like nothing can ever get better than us. We've perfected it pretty much. But then also we tend to be ahistorical. And so really the monuments we have, they're not about, I really call bullshit on the idea that somehow these are, all these anguished liberals and conservatives are worried about historical record. I think it's more about the narrative, the story of who we think we are. That's what's being confronted here. So conservatives, the thing that's being threatened is this sort of past glorious construction of what America was that we're trying to make great again, that never really existed. And liberals, this thing that's being challenged is that we're somehow a good society, that through conversation and listening, we can prevail and justice will win. So having all these these uncouth upstarts coming and tearing down statues on their own, that's not how this works. That's not decently and in order.
That's right. Kathleen's jumping on here, or what?
Well, first of all, she says we should bring your own beer at home. I think that's the ticket. I mean, it's not even 10 in the morning when we start this thing, but I'm willing to break that taboo to celebrate. Maybe with mimosas or something. That's
yeah.
Kathleen writes, I'm already hearing backlash from my parishioners. I pastor churches that sided with the South. Nobody told them they lost the war.
Yeah. There was this very funny, I think it was maybe a tweet or something, a meme, this very funny joke about, I wonder what would have happened if the Union had won the Civil War. Right? Yeah, and it's really, really interesting how the Civil War, which of course again was not very long ago in historical terms, really is continuing to resonate, right? And there is part of me oftentimes that wonders, like, would secession have just been a much better plan? Because clearly there's this big segment of the population that is addicted to a particular narrative about the quote glory of the South, which is actually this history of abominable human rights abuse that white people twist into this great thing. Which is really problematic.
And to me, this shows. I once heard Brian Stevenson, the guy behind the book and now the film, Just Mercy. I think that was what's called.
Yeah.
He said that the North may have won the Civil War, but the South won the narrative war. And to a lot of us, that might not make sense, but it's true. I mean, we didn't. So there were gains right after the Civil War for Black Americans that were stripped back during Reconstruction as liberals were, as always, too conciliatory to maintain the peace, because upset white people are the worst things to have in American political discourse, apparently. And then, Jim Crow, and then we have mass incarceration. And that leading up to this very moment is all part of that same narrative. And I think a lot of liberals think that they're on the right side of history with this because they've evolved to the point where they don't think people should be killed willy-nilly. Like that's somehow a great accomplishment.
Right.
Rather than understanding that this narrative, like this idea that somehow in particular, I've seen people freak the hell out about this recent toppling of the Columbus statue here at the Capitol in Minnesota, which was largely organized by AIM, the American Indian Movement. And that somehow Indigenous people need permission or have to have conversations and get permission to topple a statue of the symbol of genocide. Like that, they need permission. It's strange. Like, and if you say it like that, of course, your standard a Democratic politician will be like, no, of course I don't think that. But that's what you're asking. You're asking, even though they've been asking and for hundreds of years now, you think that they need permission from you in order to take the statue down.
See, I don't know if the standard Democratic politician would disagree with that. I actually think the standard Democratic politician would say, yeah, they do need permission because it's not on the reservation. It's now on our land. Mm-hmm. And sure, on the reservation, they don't have to have a statue of Christopher Columbus, but this is now our land. And yeah, they have to engage the political process. And again, I think that we need to start calling out that particular phrase,
which
because
phrase?
That's political process. Because
because
that's a code word for how we maintain power.
Yes.
And because everybody knows what happens, right? And, Mark, as you say, Native folks have been asking for this for a long, long time. They have been trying to engage the political process for a long, long time. And, the response they get always is, no, we're not going to listen to you. We don't care about your point of view. Again, we learn in school that Christopher Columbus is awesome. And we're going to leave the damn statue up. And and so the political process is not an open-ended process. It's a dead-end process.
Well, it's funny, this sort of weird jujitsu happens. Maybe that's not the best term to use, but that somehow we should leave them up to remember that they weren't good people. Like this is the angle that people have taken in recent years.
Oh, yeah.
Is like, oh yeah, we don't think Columbus is great. That's why we need to leave up this statue honoring him. Maybe after some political process, we'll change the placard so it says, not everyone thinks he's a good guy. That's
that argument. It's like so ridiculous and stupid that it's even hard to address. Kathleen's got a follow up here.
Much of the narrative is about protecting Southern women. It has, of course, not been helpful for women. I'm not sure how that Southern kind of narrative is about protecting Southern women. So I want to be educated on that. I'm not sure, like what that is.
Well, protecting Southern women from Black people, right?
So that's the black male aggressor towards white women's narrative,
right? Yeah. And so good Confederate society protected their Southern women.
Genteel society, as has often been called. Ellen says, the political process, quote, is like when you ask your dad and he's like, go ask your mom. And then you go to mom and she's like, go ask your dad ad infinitum.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you set it within the parental sphere, right? Because it is very patronizing and paternalistic.
Yes.
And so they, you pat the nice natives on the head. Or yesterday, as an Ohio state senator, I believe, said, the coloreds are not very good at washing their hands, and that's why they get more COVID. Right. Yeah. It's this infinitely patronizing, paternalistic perspective where, there is not any kind of equality or justice in the political process. And that's what this struggle is about, right? Is about equality and listening to multiple voices within the political process.
Sirius writes, having statues of murderers to keep is a shitty narrative. That keeps having statues to keep a shitty narrative is traumatizing. That's what she's saying. Like why we don't need to it's not like we're gonna, you were talking before this that, you've seen some conservative colleagues get really upset that somehow this is like the Maoist cultural revolution. That somehow doing this is going to strip away our sense of the past to create as though that that's what's going to happen without these statues, which most kids probably never even see the statues anyways, that they will somehow learn never learn about the great and glorious past of these United States.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean the whole thing again is it's sort of almost laughable in the stupidity of some of these arguments, and yet it is so incredibly emotionally powerful, which is why, as you say, Mark, this is not about history. This is about emotional attachment to a particular narrative that I want to hold on to. That and again, it centers whiteness and this American exceptionalism, and as you said, this empire. We're like the end of history. We're the best ever. I mean, it's all about creating that worldview and that reality that makes me feel so good about me and about who I am. And suddenly you start taking that away, and people lose their shit completely, because they feel like they're being somehow personally violated.
And to me, just to get all like intentionally spiritual here for a second, which this is all spiritual, but like,
yes,
this is what makes it particularly spiritual. Is this is about the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what's most important. So the conservative stories are bathed in lost prestige and power of a certain type of white Christendom that needs to be regained. And the Democrat, liberal, centrist kind of thing in America isn't much better. We need to uphold the greatest convictions and values of this Enlightenment project, so that we, again, from a place of centering whiteness, can have discourse until we can come to a common arrangement.
Yes.
And that somehow this sort of social contract sort of theory kind of bullshit. This is Ellen's comment here is great. You're not even my real parents. That's the only response to having mom and dad go back and forth. Is,
right.
If you're a Native American, you're like, you're not my real parents. Kathleen, I love it. One community I served put up a statue to a dog. Maybe we should do that. I affirm animal statue. Actually, this might be a little bit insensitive, but right here I have this little Buddha statue of a squirrel. Because I identify with a squirrel. That's kind of my sigil. Maybe giant squirrel statues. Yeah. Just putting it up there because that'll only help sales of my future as yet unfinished book I'm writing about squirrels.
Right. And so again, I mean, all sort of joking aside, I mean, what you're talking about the spirituality piece to this is so big, because again, we see how the internal ego process gets projected out onto these things, right? And so, again, the notion that there is only one statue of one person that can define our history is hilarious, right? I mean, there's 1,000 people that we could have statues of, right? All kinds of different figures. And the point is that when a society puts up statues and monuments, what they're doing is they're reinforcing certain narratives.
That's right.
And so why aren't there statues of, runaway slaves? Why isn't there a statue of Frederick Douglass? Why isn't there a statue of Malcolm X? When you put up those statues, suddenly you have a whole other narrative and a whole other aspect to history. So this idea, again, we just have to, call complete bullshit on there is only one person and one statue that will represent our history in the right way. And we have to keep that up forever in order to survive or something. I don't know what.
That's right. Some good comments coming in. Keep them coming. Ceres writes, your comment on stories and narratives is why white liberals' exclusive focus on strategy and facts is not working. Amen. This is strategies and tactics, obviously have their place and are important in political engagement. But this is a narrative battle. And liberals in America suck at narrative. Like that's our, even the far left, like the radical, like conservatives dominate the shit out of narrative. Right? Even this whole thing about taking these statues down and the Confederate flags, it's still dealing with the conservative narrative that's been incredibly successful. And we need to think about that. Going back to Jim here. Good morning. How do we bring how do we bring people together, coexist in a culture that at least politically sees itself as a Christian nation?
Well, so first of all, we have to disimbue ourselves as thinking of ourselves as a Christian nation. I would say that phrase is an oxymoron, or just maybe just a moron.
Yeah.
It's so part of what this movement and what we're seeing and what spirituality is about radical deconstruction. Right. So when you sit down in silent prayer, what you are essentially doing is facilitating your own dissolution. And we do that purposely and intentionally because we are interested in entering into what is a much wider reality that we call God or enlightenment or whatever our tradition is. So part of the problem is that if we are going to buy into this Christian nationalism thing, which is the civic religion that the Christian church in America has sort of turned into, then that's fundamentally exclusionist, racist, problematic theologically. It's a disaster. So moving into something different, we have to deconstruct that, and find another way.
Jim also asks, perhaps there really is little traction to address multiculturalism. What do you propose are grassroots steps? I'm the worst person to ask questions like this because I don't really think we should have an America. And I don't think there's such a thing as American society. I think there's white dominant society that is America. There's stories of resistance, but like this whole idea that we need to have this nation state that is the same, like is this bucket, and that it's filled with the people, everyone who lives within our borders, that fills that bucket, and that they all have to agree on everything together in order to have a society, I think is a flawed premise to begin with. And so that's why it's from that premise that you say, well, those Native Americans need to get permission to take the statue down.
Right.
It's like,
well, and again, from a global historical point of view, the nation state is a brand new concept.
It's a baby. It's
right?
It's pretty much it's about the same age as America, almost, just about.
Yeah. Right. So they're never, 1,000 years ago, there was no such thing as a nation state. There were different tribal groups and kings, and actually a really fun. I just watched. Now I'm going to forget the name of it. It's this great TV show about like 8th and 9th century Britain. And it's pretty hokey and all of this. But what's very cool about it from a political point of view is that you see like all these little kingdoms within what is now the nation state of England. Mm-hmm. And it really gives you a totally different view, again, on a reality of how people organize themselves. So, this is one type of organization, but it's a very new one, and it's got a lot of issues. All right, the comments are pouring in.
One last sentence. I think a helpful question is, how do we recognize that we're a set of different collectives or collectivities, and how do those relate together in a way that's mutual without domination is the question that I'm more interested in.
There we go.
Yeah, so Bruce, maybe you could say more about this, Bruce, but what about evangelicals sent in to pacify the revolution? I understand that part, and create co-option and flag burning. I don't understand how that all connects, but right now we're seeing a lot of evangelicals coming into 38th in Chicago to kind of use it as a revival spot, because that's what evangelicals do culturally. Is speaking as a former kind of evangelical. Evangelicals have very little sense of history or place, and so they basically culturally have to be parasitic. I'm just going to say it like that. And that doesn't necessarily mean that every evangelical has to be that way forever. It's just evangelicalism as a phenomenon within America has no self-identity that's deep. Right. So it's parasitic and sucks life away.
A friend of mine just told me about this young white evangelicals showing up at this Black Lives Matter rally in southern Michigan with this stack of Bibles and insisted on like getting up on stage and starting to hand out Bibles to everybody. And it's so sad. It's really sad. Okay.
How about a statue of Geronimo? Yeah.
Well, and again, to me, the issue is how about listening to what Native Americans want as a statue? They may culturally not even like statues, right? So that's again the whole other idea is let's center this away from white people deciding everything about everything.
Yeah. I did not know this. Ellen says that Rochester, New York has a statue for Douglas. Your dream has already been fulfilled, Dan.
Thank you, Ellen. The robot birds told you that, I'm sure. No.
Jessica writes, yes, Kathleen, Southerners still identify against North, even if it's not animosity anymore. It is definitely emotional, gut-level, knee-jerk response on its best day, and more simply oppressive on the other days. And I think to different white Southerners, it means different things. Some as complex as family heritage, and others as simple as an identity point and FU to other groups. A professor at a Southern college once told me a joke that he shared with a Japanese colleague. Then it trails off. I don't know. There's no more comments after that. So I hope you're all right, Jessica.
Yeah, absolutely correct. That's definitely been my experience for sure. All right, let's keep on rolling.
How can a memorial like the George Floyd one, which is positive, end or become a way to no longer deal with the reasons for revolution, just like what is done with MLK's holiday? The MLK holiday thing is interesting because it was Coretta Scott King who spent a lot of energy petitioning for that holiday.
Right.
So like on one sense it honors King because it's coming from his widow, but on the other hand, it's part of this process of taking the teeth out of his message.
Yeah, but Bruce, what your comment gets at is again a very well-known phenomenon within the spiritual world, right? Which is that the ego process of co-optation and solidification is always working. And so that's why we have to continue to engage in our spiritual practice because, I'm sure it's coming. There is going to be a Coke ad with that George Floyd picture in it, right? I mean, it's coming. I just ruined Mark's day, but
I mean, we're already there. Like,
yeah,
every company that I've done business with in the last year has sent me an email about Black Lives Matter, and to me, I'm sure there's some sincerity in it, but it also feels like they're trying to cash in.
So yes, I mean, all of these things are always co-opted by either individual or corporate egos to undermine true justice and openness, and that's why we need to keep doing our spiritual practice. All right.
Catherine says, Minnesota Native folks have been trying to get the racist colonial art at the state capitol changed for years. That's true.
Yeah.
So you can check out Healing Minnesota Stories. That's a large part of their work. Jim Bear Jacobs. Ellen Maury says, in the movie Inside Out, parts of the main character's personality represented by statuesque characters in their brain, family, friends, hobbies. As she outgrows the need to rely on these things, the structure falls away and she has space for new structure. But while the space is empty, she is disillusioned, scared, and lost. How do we help people reorient to having a new imagination? That's a big question.
Yeah, well, and again, this is the process of the spiritual life. And the way that was portrayed in the movie was very cool. And this is exactly what we fight tooth and nail against, right? Is that open moment of, and the Buddhists call this groundlessness, where we face this emptiness and this openness, and we don't know what's coming next, and we don't know how things are going to be reformed, and we don't have an orientation. And that's really hard and scary. But again, this is what healthy spiritual community is supposed to be about, right? Is supporting people in that movement through that. And again, all the spiritual teachings talk about that. That's part of the process. that you move out of that to a better place. And so you learn about those teachings, you engage with people that are farther down the path, etc. But yeah, and that's what we're seeing in all this grasping, right? The statues are coming down and it's like, oh, there's nothing on the pedestal. So now what's going to happen? Right. And there's this panic. And again, we need to be open to that.
That ties directly in with what's happening with policing. This idea of abolishing or defunding. People can't imagine something else replacing that, so they're freaking the hell out, as though it's just people are advocating for pure nihilism. That's how they're interpreting it.
Right, exactly.
Bruce says, I believe evangelicals that attempt to pacify people of color via evangelism are like the slave master did with the slave. That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, let's get to Sophia's. Hey, Sophia. Sophia's in Nashville.
Our Tennessee House Committee voted down a bid on Tuesday to remove a statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest from the state capitol. We have busts of KKK Klansmen in our state house. The measure failed 11-5.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing, is that the vast majority of times when these things go to a vote through a nice process, they lose. And so that's why eventually at some point people are like, well, we're just going for it. We're taking this thing down. All right. Well, we've run out of time once again. Awesome engagement. Thank you very much for all your comments and reflections. And big number 50 tomorrow.
Yeah.
So bring your beer or send us I don't know, Mark likes gummy bears, so mail him a package of gummy bears.
Take yours, inject vodka into the middle of them, and then I'll just
there you go.
That'll be a party.
Maybe we should have a giant gummy bear statue.
I am for that.
All right. See you all later.
It won't last long, though.